Imagine for a second being falsely accused of just a horrific crime. You're stripped of everything that makes you who you are, and you're thrown into this dark subterranean cell.
Right. Yeah. Your entire life just implodes overnight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, in that moment, your most basal instinct, like the absolute core of your human hardwiring, is going to scream at you to do whatever it takes to survive.
Oh, absolutely.
You'll want to fight or manipulate or, bargain your way out of that darkness.
Because it's the ultimate existential crisis, right? When the floor drops out from under you like that, self-preservation isn't just an option. I mean, it feels like a biological imperative.
It really does. But the framework we were unpacking today actually argues that your survival instinct is exactly the thing you need to abandon.
Which sounds completely backward.
It does. But welcome to today's custom-tailored deep dive titled Honoring God. For you listening, our mission today is to pull apart this really fascinating theological document.
And it demands something entirely counterintuitive.
It really does. Yeah. It explores what it actually looks like to prioritize the reputation of God over your own safety, your own comfort, and, well, your own survival.
And we should clarify, we aren't just going to sit here and talk about abstract religious philosophy.
No, definitely not.
We are taking this right down to the bedrock of human endurance. We're going to look at extreme, gritty, historical applications of faith, under the most intense pressure imaginable.
Yeah, because usually when you enter into a serious agreement, like a mortgage or some massive corporate contract, there's this ironclad expectation of absolute precision, right?
Right. You negotiate the terms, you redline the clauses.
Exactly. You know exactly what you were giving and exactly what you were getting. It's safe, it's predictable.
It's fundamentally transactional. You retain a sense of control.
But stepping into the theology presented in our materials today means basically tearing up that contract. You are effectively being asked to sign a blank check with your life.
A blank check? That is a heavy concept.
Yeah. You hand over the check and you let someone else fill in the amount. And what we really need to figure out today is, well, what happens when it feels like that blank check just bounced?
And that is the central tension we have to navigate here. Because the historical case studies we have in front of us, Joseph in Egypt, Daniel in Babylon, and an unnamed Canaanite woman in Tyre, these are not stories of people who, signed a blank check and then immediately received a life of luxury and ease.
No, far from it. I mean, we're going to see physical trauma, we'll see intellectual seduction, and just extreme social marginalization.
Yeah.
But before we get to those historical realities, we kind of need to establish the rules of this blank check. The foundational argument of our material hinges entirely on what the author calls the fill-in-the-blank paradigm.
Let's lay the groundwork for that.
Yeah.
This whole paradigm shift is rooted in the book of Romans, specifically Romans 2.24.
Right.
And it delivers just a devastating critique to the religious establishment of its time. It says, "The name of God is being blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you."
Wow. I mean, that is a staggering indictment. It essentially says, the rest of the world thinks God is a joke and it's your fault.
Precisely. I mean, it is the ultimate failure of representation.
Yeah.
So to counter this catastrophic public relations failure, the theological shift proposed is, well, it's simple in syntax, but it's incredibly difficult in execution.
Right.
The shift is simply, I want to honor God by blank.
But here's where the catch comes in, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't get to put your own goals in that blank space.
Yeah, you absolutely don't.
You can't just say, I want to honor God by becoming a millionaire, or I want to honor God by getting that corner office promotion. What goes into the blank must be the things that matter to the architect of the universe, not the things that matter to, your ego.
The parameters are very strictly defined in the source text. The things that matter to God are categorized into two expansive spheres, his person and his work.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit, because his person and his work sounds a little bit like theological jargon.
It does, yeah, but it's actually deeply practical when you look at it. God's person relates to his fundamental identity, right? Yeah. As the creator of the cosmos and the redeemer of humanity.
Okay.
And then God's work encompasses the initial act of creation, the ongoing and frankly messy process of redeeming broken people, and then the ultimate horizon.
Which is the coming restoration of everything that was fractured since the fall of mankind.
Exactly. And the material points out that the final complete revelation of this entire cosmic agenda is localized in the person of Jesus.
Yeah, the text points to Hebrews 1 for that.
Right, describing the sun as the radiance of divine glory and the exact representation of that essence. And it also pulls from John 5, insisting that honoring the Son is the exact equivalent of honoring the Father.
They are inextricably linked.
They are. So when you are filling in that blank, your daily choices, your ethics, your reactions to trauma, they all have to align with that massive agenda.
So you aren't just trying to be a quote-unquote good person.
No, you are actively participating in the ultimate restoration of the world.
Okay, I have to step in here and push back a little bit on behalf of the listener, because philosophically, sure, this sounds beautiful. It's a great sentiment for, like, a weekend meditation retreat.
Sure.
But practically speaking, this is terrifying. The premise is that if you focus entirely on protecting God's honor, God promises to fill in the blank for your daily earthly necessities.
Yes. The text points to Matthew 5 about God causing the sun to rise and rain to fall, and Matthew 6 about praying for daily bread.
Right, but I can hear the skepticism from anyone listening right now.
And it's justified skepticism.
Totally justified. We live in a reality of inflation, medical bills, and unexpected layoffs. The idea that you just, surrender your logistical earthly concerns and focus exclusively on the kingdom feels a little irresponsible.
It sounds reckless.
Doesn't Jesus explicitly warn against worrying about what we will eat or wear? Like, how does a modern person just switch off the anxiety of survival? If you have kids to feed, handing over a blank check with your life's priorities seems crazy.
It is the ultimate friction point of faith, without a doubt. And to understand the mechanics of how this is actually supposed to work, we have to look past the surface-level reading of Matthew 6.33.
Which is the famous, "Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well."
Exactly. We have to strip away the cultural baggage of those words.
Because seeking the kingdom isn't about manifesting a cloud and a harp. It's not passive.
Not in the slightest. According to the framework we're analyzing, seeking the kingdom means actively, even aggressively pursuing the realization of God's reign and God's will right in your immediate environment.
Okay.
And righteousness isn't about moral superiority. It's not self-righteousness. It is defined strictly as acting in harmony with the will of God. It is an alignment issue.
It's about getting your gears meshed with the gears of the universe.
That's a great way to put it. The transaction here is not a financial ledger. It is absolute trust. The promise is that if you prioritize the integrity of God's reputation, the Creator is vastly more capable of managing your daily bread than your own anxiety is.
Right. But that provision is intrinsically tied to your participation in his work.
Okay, I see the logic. But this brings us right back to the metaphor of the bounce check.
Yeah.
It is very easy to act in harmony with God's will when the sun is shining and your bank account is full. But what happens when you prioritize God's honor, you do the right thing, and the immediate result is an absolute catastrophe?
Right.
How does the theology hold up when the blank check seemingly results in ruin?
That is exactly why we cannot stay in the realm of abstract theology today. We have to test this against the anvil of history. And honestly, there is no better test case for a life going violently, unfairly off script than the story of Joseph.
Let's dive into Joseph. I mean, most people listening are probably familiar with the broad strokes, right? The coat of many colors, the dreams, the jealous brothers.
The Sunday school summary.
Exactly. We don't need to rehash that completely.
Yeah.
But what I find so fascinating in this deep dive is the sheer psychological weight of his betrayal.
Yes, because this wasn't an attack by a foreign enemy army. This was his own flesh and blood, his brothers.
The brothers who were supposed to protect him, they threw him into a pit. They literally debated murdering him, and ultimately they sold him into international human trafficking. He ended up as property in Egypt.
But the analysis here points out a really brilliant, almost cruel irony regarding the brothers' motivation for doing that.
Yeah.
They sold him specifically to stop his prophetic dreams from coming true.
Right. The dreams where they were all bowing down to him. The text refers to this as an unsuspecting prophecy because Joseph, in his youthful naivety, just shared these visions without understanding the psychological damage it would do to his siblings.
Right. He lacked the emotional intelligence to realize that, hey, bragging about your older brothers bowing to you is a terrible survival strategy.
He certainly did. But the deep irony is that the brothers' violent, malicious intervention, their attempt to completely subvert the divine narrative, actually became the precise mechanism that God used.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it put Joseph in the exact geopolitical location necessary for the dream to materialize. They didn't thwart the plan, they unknowingly executed it.
That's incredible. So he is dragged to Egypt, completely traumatized, stripped of his identity, and he's sold to Potiphar, the captain of Pharaoh's guard.
Right.
And initially, it looks like the blank check is clearing, right?
Yeah.
Genesis 39 tells us he experiences immense favor. He acts with incredible administrative brilliance, and before long, he is running the entire estate.
Because he is operating in harmony with God's will, even within the confines of his enslavement, his character is proving to be incredibly resilient.
Yeah.
But then the ultimate test of that character arrives.
Potiphar's wife.
Yeah.
She initiates this relentless campaign of sexual harassment. I mean, the environment is incredibly toxic. And Joseph refuses her. But the reason he refuses her is the linchpin of our entire discussion today.
This is exactly where we see the fill-in-the-blank paradigm weaponized against temptation.
Right, because when she corners him, he doesn't say, I can't do this because Potiphar is a powerful military commander and he will literally execute me.
Which would have been a very valid fear.
Oh, totally. But he doesn't base his morality on the fear of human consequence. He says, how could I do such a great evil and sin against God?
He elevates the stakes from a domestic betrayal to a cosmic offense.
Exactly.
He is putting God's person and God's work above his own biological desires, and crucially, above the immense political advantage he could have gained by becoming the secret lover of the master's wife.
And here is where the check bounces. He makes the ultimate moral stand. He literally leaves his garment behind and sprints away to protect God's honor and his reward. She fabricates a devastating accusation of attempted rape. And I really want to dig into the linguistics here because our source material points out the specific words she uses when she lies to her servants.
Yeah.
It reveals the absolute malice of her intent.
The Hebrew phrasing is incredibly revealing here. When she presents Joseph's abandoned garment to the household staff, she immediately weaponizes his race.
Right.
She says, see, my husband brought in a Hebrew man to us to humiliate us.
That verb, to humiliate, it carries a lot of weight, doesn't it?
It does. The root of that Hebrew word isn't just about embarrassment. It means to hold something up for intense ridicule, to make sport of someone, or to toy with them in a deeply harmful, degrading way.
It's the language of utter contempt.
Yes, exactly. She is taking his profound moral integrity, his absolute refusal to cross a boundary out of respect for God, and she is twisting it into a narrative of violent ethnic subjugation.
Wow.
She's claiming that this foreign slave was trying to exert dominance over the Egyptian household.
It is a total character assassination on top of a false criminal charge. So Potiphar erupts in fury, and Joseph is thrown into the royal prison.
Yeah.
And this is the moment where I think anyone listening would look at this theology and say, I'm out.
Right. I quit.
Yeah. Joseph played by the rules. He guarded God's reputation at the cost of his own comfort, and he ended up rotting in a dungeon. It is the definition of a raw deal.
On the surface, it is a complete catastrophe. But this is where the material demands. We look at the underlying mechanism of resilience. The principle here is that success in the face of temptation and suffering depends far more on character than on circumstances.
That is a tough pill to swallow when your circumstances are a subterranean prison cell.
Oh, absolutely. It is. But think about the psychological reality of Joseph's situation.
Wow.
He had every right, humanly speaking, to become deeply existentially embittered.
Yeah, he really did.
He could have abandoned his faith entirely. He could have just sulked in the corner of that dungeon, consumed by the sheer injustice of it all. But he didn't.
No, the material actually describes his spirit as unconquerable.
Because his character was anchored to something outside of his immediate shifting circumstances. His commitment was to the will of God, not to his own immediate vindication.
Right.
And because he maintained that internal alignment, that righteousness we discussed earlier, he once again manifested an administrative brilliance that commanded respect. I mean, even the prison warden recognized it and effectively handed over the management of the whole facility to him.
Which brings us to the moment where the scope of his influence dramatically expands. We move to Genesis 40. The dungeon gets two high-profile political prisoners, right? Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and his chief baker.
Yep.
And on the same night, they both have these highly symbolic, deeply disturbing dreams.
They wake up visibly distressed. And notice Joseph's immediate reaction here. He doesn't just pass them by. He is observant. He actually asks them why they're so troubled.
Yeah.
And when they complain that there's no one to interpret their dreams, Joseph's response is just the perfect embodiment of our deep dive today.
He says, Don't interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me.
Right. He instinctively deflects the glory. He possesses this incredible supernatural gift, yet his first reflex is to ensure God's reputation is front and center.
And the interpretations he gives are staggering in their specificity. Let's look at the contrast between them. The cupbearer dreams of a vine with 3 branches that ripens into grapes, which he then squeezes into Pharaoh's cup. And Joseph says, the 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position.
It's a message of total restoration. And Joseph tacks on a very vulnerable human plea here. He says, remember me when it goes well with you, for I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and I have done nothing here to deserve being put in a dungeon.
It's such a vital detail. It shows he hasn't lost his humanity. He isn't some stoic robot immune to suffering, right? He acutely feels the injustice of his enslavement.
Yes.
Now, the baker hears this fantastic interpretation and gets excited. He says, oh, I dreamed of 3 baskets of white bread on my head, but the birds were eating the baked goods out of the top basket.
And Joseph doesn't sugarcoat the devastating truth. He tells the baker, the 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat your flesh.
The psychological horror of that interpretation is profound, especially when you understand the cultural context about Egyptian beliefs regarding the afterlife.
Oh, it cannot be overstated. In ancient Egyptian theology, the preservation of the physical body was absolutely essential for the spirit, the ka, and the batur survive and find rest in the afterlife.
Right.
So decapitation and impalement weren't just a brutal method of execution. The public exposure to scavenging birds was designed to obliterate the body.
Wow.
It annihilated the soul's chance at eternal peace. It was the ultimate cosmic punishment.
And Joseph has the integrity to deliver that terrifying truth without flinching. And of course, it plays out exactly as he said. On the 3rd day, the baker is impaled and the cupbearer is restored. But the cupbearer forgets Joseph entirely for 2 excruciating years.
2 years of silence, 2 years of waking up in that cell, wondering if the blank check you signed was just a total delusion.
I really think this is the most relatable part of the story for many people listening. It's not the dramatic moments of temptation or the supernatural dreams. It's the long, agonizing stretches of time where it seems like God is entirely inactive, where you were doing the right thing and you were just completely forgotten by the world.
And yet, his character held. I mean, the fact that he was willing to interpret their dreams at all, while his own childhood dreams remained unfulfilled and seemingly mocked by his current imprisonment, it proves he hadn't abandoned his trust in God's ultimate sovereignty.
Which brings us to the climax of his story. Pharaoh has his own night terrors. The famous dreams of the 7 fat cows being devoured by the 7 emaciated cows and the healthy grain being swallowed by the withered grain.
Right.
The entire brain trust of the Egyptian empire is totally baffled. And finally, the cupbearer's memory is jogged.
They haul Joseph out of the dungeon, they shave him, they put him in clean clothes, and suddenly this forgotten Hebrew slave is standing before the most powerful monarch on the face of the earth.
This is the moment. I mean, if there was ever a time to cash in the blank check for personal gain, it is right now. Pharaoh looks at him and says, I have heard that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it.
Think about the temptation here. All Joseph has to say is, yes, Your Majesty, I am a uniquely gifted visionary. I can solve your problem, but first, I need a full royal pardon.
He could have negotiated his freedom in an instant. He could have built a massive platform for his own ego.
But instead, we get Genesis 41.1 steet. Joseph looks at Pharaoh and says, it is not within my power, but God will speak concerning the welfare of Pharaoh.
He completely abdicates the spotlight. He hands the microphone entirely over to God. Absolute truthfulness in guarding God's honor was vastly more important to Joseph than any immediate personal advantage.
And the result of that radical alignment? God honors him in return. Pharaoh doesn't just pardon him. He makes him the 2nd most powerful man in Egypt, putting him in charge of the entire economic preparation for the coming famine.
The overarching takeaway our material highlights here is from 1 Samuel 2.30. I will honor those who honor me. By relentlessly protecting God's reputation, Joseph transformed his burden into a bridge.
Beautifully said.
The dungeon wasn't the end of his story. It was the rigorous training ground that prepared him for the palace. So we've seen how the blank check survives physical trauma, false accusations, and imprisonment. We've seen it survive the dungeon. But what happens when the threat isn't physical abuse? What happens when the danger isn't a dark cell, but, say, a world-class education?
Right. This is a brilliant pivot in our sources. We are moving from the brutal physical chains of Egypt to the luxurious velvet ropes of Babylon. We are transitioning to the psychological warfare of cultural assimilation.
Let's talk about Daniel, because the context here is vital for understanding the immense intellectual pressure he was under. We were leaping forward in history to the year 605 BC.
The geopolitical tectonic plates of the ancient world have just collided at this point. Prince Nebuchadnezzar, commanding the Babylonian war machine on behalf of his father, has just annihilated the combined forces of the Assyrian and Egyptian empires at the Battle of Carchemish.
Carchemish, the battle that effectively crowned Babylon as the undisputed hyperpower of the known world.
Exactly. The balance of power shifted overnight. Judah, the southern kingdom of the Israelites, suddenly finds itself under the crushing weight of Babylonian dominion.
Right.
Nebuchadnezzar sweeps into Jerusalem and executes a highly strategic deportation. He doesn't just take slaves, he targets the elite. He takes the royal and noble youths back to Babylon, and among them is a teenager named Daniel.
Imagine the trauma of that. I mean, you are a teenager forcibly extracted from your homeland, your family, your religion, and dragged hundreds of miles to the opulent capital of the empire that just conquered your people.
But Nebuchadnezzar's strategy is far more insidious than simple imprisonment. He is an enlightened despot, right? He realizes that the best way to govern a vast multi-ethnic empire isn't just through military terror. It's through intellectual co-optation.
Oh, that makes sense.
He wants to drain the brain trust of his conquered enemies and repurpose their brilliance for his own administrative bureaucracy.
Which, if you strip away the conquering army part, sounds eerily similar to modern corporate recruiting.
It really is the ancient equivalent of a full-ride scholarship to an Ivy League university, followed by a guaranteed C-suite position in the world's most powerful corporation.
But the fine print on this scholarship is brutal. To serve in the king's court, these Israelite teenagers had to undergo a 3-year intensive reprogramming. They were forced to completely immerse themselves in the literature, the language, and the religious philosophy of the Chaldeans. It was systematic, forced assimilation.
And the very first step in this psychological reprogramming was an attack on their core identity. They changed their names.
This is where the psychological warfare really becomes evident. Let's look at the linguistics of the renaming, because it is incredibly aggressive. In Hebrew culture, a name isn't just a label. It is a profound declaration of identity and theological allegiance.
Right. Daniel's given name means God is my judge. It points directly to the sovereignty of Yahweh. The Babylonians strip that away and rename him Belteshazzar, which translates to Bel's prince, honoring the chief Babylonian deity.
Wow. And they do the same thing to his 3 friends, right? Hananiah, which means Yahweh is gracious, becomes Shadrach, likely tied to the moon god Aku. Mishael, meaning who is what God is twisted into Meshach. And Azariah, Yahweh has helped, becomes Abednego, meaning servant of Nebo, the Babylonian god of wisdom.
Think about the cognitive dissonance this creates. Every single time they were addressed by a teacher, a guard, or a peer, they were forced to verbally process a name that glorified the very gods of the empire that destroyed their homeland.
That's exhausting.
It was a daily, relentless mechanism designed to slowly erase their Israelite heritage and integrate them entirely into the Babylonian worldview.
They were basically being slowly digested by the culture. And the pressure to conform must have been suffocating. If you want to survive, if you want to advance, you just play the game, you adopt the persona.
Yeah.
Which makes Daniel's line in the sand so incredibly fascinating to me. Because he doesn't rebel against the name change. He doesn't refuse to read the Chaldean textbooks. But he draws an absolute unyielding boundary at the cafeteria menu.
Yes. Daniel chapter 1. The king assigns them a daily ration of his own royal delicacies and his own wine.
And Daniel says no. He resolves in his heart that he will not defile himself with the king's food. Now, I have to push back here because this seems completely arbitrary. He is studying pagan astrology. He answers to the name of a pagan god. Why is a plate of royal steak the hill he is willing to die on?
It is a critical distinction, and it goes right back to the mechanism of honoring God's person and work. Reading a book or answering to an imposed name are external realities inflicted upon him. But the royal food represented something vastly different.
How so?
Well, in the ancient Near East, dining from the king's table wasn't just about caloric intake. It was a profound covenantal act. It was a pledge of absolute loyalty and dependence.
Oh, I see.
Furthermore, these royal delicacies had almost certainly been ritually sacrificed to Babylonian idols, and the meat would have been prepared in direct violation of the Levitical dietary laws God had given Israel.
So it wasn't just food. It was communion.
Exactly. To ingest the king's food was to physically internalize the Babylonian religious system. It was the moment where cultural education crossed the line into spiritual defilement. It was the point where the blank check was being filled out to Nebuchadnezzar instead of Yahweh.
Okay, so how does a teenage prisoner of war navigate this without getting executed for treason? He doesn't riot, he doesn't go on a hunger strike and demand his rights.
No, his approach is a masterclass in subverting hostile systems while maintaining flawless character. He's extraordinarily tactful. He goes to the chief official and respectfully asks for permission to opt out of the royal diet.
And the official is terrified. The text notes that God had granted Daniel favor and compassion with this official, but human fear still dominates. The official essentially says, I like you, Daniel, but if the king sees you looking malnourished compared to the other students, he will literally decapitate me. My life is on the line here.
Right, it's a very real bureaucratic terror. So Daniel pivots. He doesn't argue theology with the middle manager. He goes directly to the warden assigned to oversee their daily care, and he proposes an empirical test.
A 10-day trial. He says, give us only vegetables to eat and water to drink for 10 days. Then, physically compare our appearance with the young men who are eating the king's royal food and make your decision based on what you see.
And just a quick note on the translation, the Hebrew word translated as vegetables, there is pulse, meaning anything grown from sown seed. It's an incredibly Spartan diet.
Right. And at the end of the 10 days, the results are undeniable. Daniel and his 3 friends look significantly healthier and better nourished than all the youths gorging on the king's delicacies. Now, we really need to pause and explore the mechanism behind this because it is so easy to misinterpret.
Yes, our source materials emphasize a massive crucial point here. We cannot read this as the discovery of a magical ancient superfood diet.
Right. God did not reward them because a vegan diet is scientifically proven to make you outshine meat eaters in exactly 240 hours. I mean, 10 days is simply not enough time for a dietary shift to produce a radical physiological transformation that outperforms the best nutrition the empire had to offer.
Absolutely not. The biological turnaround was either an extreme natural provision directly blessed by God, or it was entirely supernatural. But the underlying mechanism wasn't the nutritional value of the pulse. The mechanism was their spiritual obedience.
Their physical vibrancy was the outward manifestation of their internal refusal to compromise God's honor. They prioritized God's reputation over their own advancement and comfort, and God filled in the blank with vitality.
And that obedience fortified them for much harder tests down the road. Because when the 3 years of rigorous training finally conclude, they are brought before Nebuchadnezzar for their final examination.
The ultimate oral defense. And the king is astounded. He finds no one in the entire cohort equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah.
The evaluation absolute. In every single matter of wisdom and understanding that the king consulted them on, he found them to be 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his entire realm.
10 times better. Again, we have to look at the cause and effect here. God rewarded their relentless character with superior cognitive ability and wisdom. They didn't just survive Babylon, they intellectually dominated it. And on top of that, God gives Daniel a very specific supernatural capability, the ability to understand all kinds of visions and dreams.
The parallel to Joseph here is just impossible to ignore.
It's identical. Both are exiled in a foreign superpower. Both endure immense pressure to abandon their spiritual identity. Both are granted this specific prophetic insight, and most importantly, both of them absolutely refuse to take the credit for it.
That is the defining characteristic of this theology. Daniel writes this incredible historical account where he unabashedly states that he was 10 times smarter than the greatest minds in Babylon. But it never reads as arrogant boasting. Why? Because the entire narrative is structured around the fact that God granted these abilities.
He guarded God's reputation in an intellectual culture that was explicitly designed to eradicate it. He proved that you can climb to the absolute pinnacle of a corrupt, secular system without compromising your spiritual integrity, provided your primary goal is honoring the Creator rather than securing your own legacy.
The overarching principle uniting Joseph and Daniel is clear. Godly character is the ultimate qualification for profound influence.
Okay, so let's synthesize where we are before we move to our final historical example. We have looked at Joseph and Daniel, 2 young men who, despite facing immense trauma, false imprisonment, and psychological reprogramming, ended up as highly educated, incredibly powerful geopolitical figures. They were operating in the highest echelons of imperial government. But our material now executes a radical pivot.
We are leaving the grand halls of power, we're leaving the Old Testament, and we're moving into the grit and dust of the New Testament. We're looking at a story in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 15, centered on someone who existed on the absolute margins of society.
An unnamed Canaanite woman. Now, to really grasp the tension of this encounter, we have to set the geographical and cultural stage.
The setting is crucial here. Jesus has deliberately withdrawn from the familiar territory of Galilee and traveled into the region of Tyre and Sidon.
Which is Gentile territory.
Yes, and not just any Gentile territory. Tyre and Sidon were ancient, wealthy Phoenician city-states, culturally sophisticated but historically steeped in idolatry and deeply antagonistic toward the Jewish people.
Okay, so this is a region that represented centuries of hostility.
Exactly. So Jesus is essentially walking into hostile territory. And out of this environment comes a Canaanite woman, crying out in absolute desperation. She yells, "Have mercy on me, Lord, son of David. My daughter is horribly demon-possessed."
The sheer terror of her situation is hard to overstate. She's watching her child being torn apart by a dark spiritual force, and she is utterly powerless to stop it. She approaches this Jewish rabbi as her last desperate hope, but the barriers she immediately hits are immense.
First, she hits the bureaucratic wall of the disciples. They are deeply annoyed by her presence. They treat her like a nuisance. They go to Jesus and beg him, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." They have zero compassion. They just want the screaming to stop.
And then comes an even more agonizing barrier.
Yeah.
The response from Jesus himself. The text records that initially, he did not answer her a word.
The silent treatment is agonizing, but she refuses to be ignored. She pushes past the annoyed disciples, throws herself down in front of Jesus, and pleads, "Lord, help me."
And this leads to what is undeniably one of the most jarring, culturally offensive interactions recorded in the Gospels. Jesus finally addresses her, but he doesn't offer immediate comfort. He looks at her and says, "It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." Okay, I have to stop here and challenge this aggressively, because to anyone listening today, hearing Jesus refer to a desperate, grieving mother as a dog sounds abhorrent. It sounds racist, abrasive, and completely devoid of empathy. If the entire premise of our deep dive today is about honoring God, how in the world does this harsh, seemingly cruel insult fit into that framework?
It is a deeply uncomfortable passage, I completely agree. And it requires us to understand the pedagogical methods of first-century rabbis. Our source material provides a brilliant 9-point analysis that entirely reframes this interaction.
Okay, I'm listening.
Jesus is not hurling a racial slur in anger. He is initiating a profound, high-stakes theological test.
How so?
He is deliberately vocalizing the standard, prejudiced Jewish worldview of that era, the idea that Gentiles were unclean dogs outside the covenant, in order to test the depth and resilience of her faith.
Oh, I see.
He is presenting her with the ultimate theological barrier. My primary mission right now is to the lost sheep of Israel. You are outside that boundary.
He is giving her every reason to walk away offended.
Exactly. He is testing whether her desire for healing is stronger than her cultural pride.
And her response is an absolute masterstroke of faith. She doesn't scream at him. She doesn't storm off in a rage of offended dignity. She leans directly into the insult. She accepts the metaphor and turns it back on him. She says, "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table."
It is one of the most staggering displays of theological agility in the entire Bible. Let's break down the author's analysis of why this specific response honored God so profoundly. Point 1.
Right.
She spoke honestly and directly to her need. Point 2. She was driven by a consuming, sacrificial love for her child that superseded her own ego.
Point 3 is fascinating to me. She publicly esteemed and honored Jesus by using the title Son of David.
Yes. She, a Canaanite woman from a pagan culture, recognized Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, a reality that the religious leaders in Jerusalem were actively rejecting at the time. She honors his true identity.
Point 4. She was completely undeterred by his initial silence. Point 5. She submitted herself entirely to his authority.
And points 6 and 7 deal with her intellectual brilliance in this debate. When Jesus establishes the boundary, the children's bread belongs to Israel, she doesn't argue that she deserves a seat at the table. She argues within the framework he established.
Right.
She essentially says, "I agree with your mission to Israel, but a master's table is so abundant that crumbs naturally fall. Providing me a crumb doesn't rob the children of their meal."
Which brings us to the emotional and theological core of her story,
Yeah.
and the reason she is the ultimate example of the blank check. Point 8. Her hope was fixed exclusively on what only God could do. She gladly accepted the smallest conceivable blessing, a mere crumb, because she fundamentally understood the boundless power of the source.
She knew that a fraction of Jesus' power was more than sufficient to obliterate a hopeless demonic possession.
And point 9 is the resolution. Jesus doesn't rebuke her for arguing. He's thrilled by it. He says, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." And her daughter was healed from that very hour. She honored God's person and work, and God filled in the blank with a miracle.
To capture the sheer emotional gravity of this encounter, our source material includes a piece of contemporary poetry by Randy Johnson titled Crumbs. It reconstructs this narrative from the intimate perspective of the woman's family.
It's a fantastic piece of illustrative content because it makes the theology visceral. It sets the scene with the terrifying reality of the possession. Our daughter is in the throes of horrific demonic blows. We are utterly without hope. Terror steals our strength to cope.
It highlights the absolute despair, and then she hears that the Jewish prophet has entered Tyre. She knows the cultural rules. She knows she is considered an outsider, an enemy. But the poem captures her resolve. Love compels me to dare it.
She risks the humiliation. And the poem brilliantly distills the theological debate between them. It paraphrases Jesus' initial rejection. "Small dogs don't merit my bread. What's meant for the Jews won't be spread." And her poetic response is the absolute crux of our entire deep dive today. Crumbs from your table won't deprive. Small dogs can eat them and thrive.
Small dogs can eat them and thrive. She understands the physics of divine grace. And the poem concludes by summarizing the universal application of this truth. Crumbs that fall from his table have the same power to enable healing and commendation, no matter your life's station.
No matter your life station. That is the golden thread tying this entire immense analysis together. Think about the massive spectrum of human experience we have covered today.
We started with Joseph, a young man navigating the trauma of familial betrayal, human trafficking, false accusations, and the despair of a foreign dungeon.
We moved to Daniel, a teenage intellectual facing the sophisticated psychological warfare of cultural assimilation and the daily pressure to compromise his identity in the halls of an empire.
And we ended with the Canaanite woman, a marginalized, desperate mother facing insurmountable cultural prejudice, religious barriers, and the terrifying reality of demonic oppression.
3 wildly different contexts. Different eras, different genders, different socioeconomic realities, different kinds of trauma. But the governing dynamic that led to their survival and ultimate victory was exactly the same in every single instance.
They relentlessly guarded the honor of God. They prioritized the reputation, the person, and the work of God far above their own immediate comfort, their egos, or their desire for self-preservation.
They signed the blank check, even when it looked like the check bounced. When Joseph went to jail, when Daniel faced the dietary test, when the Canaanite woman was called a dog, they held their character steady. And eventually, in God's timing, the check cleared with unimaginable provision.
Which forces us to turn the lens of this deep dive directly onto our own lives.
It really does. For you listening right now, you have to examine your own fill in the blank. When you look at the landscape of your life, the friction at your job, the financial anxiety, the relational conflicts, the hidden traumas you're trying to manage, where is your energy actually going?
It is our default setting to obsess over manufacturing our own daily bread. We want to control the outcome. We want to dictate the terms of our own survival.
But the challenge of these historical texts is to flick that paradigm. Are you willing to prioritize God's reputation in your workplace, even if it costs you a promotion? Are you willing to maintain flawless character in your darkest, most unfair trials like Joseph did? Are you willing to trust the architect of the universe to fill in the blank for your necessities?
It requires a radical, terrifying shift in how we view our resources and our struggles. But the promise is resolute. If you seek the kingdom and align yourself with God's righteousness, the provision will follow.
As we conclude this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought to wrestle with, something that builds directly on the brilliance of the Canaanite woman.
Consider the magnitude of her confidence in a single crumb. She believed with absolute certainty that the smallest conceivable fraction of God's grace was potent enough to entirely obliterate a hopeless, terrifying situation.
So ask yourself this. If a mere crumb falling from the master's table possesses that kind of boundless restorative power, well, what does it say about our modern tendency to demand the entire loaf? Why do we constantly demand total clarity, absolute comfort, and perfect certainty before we are willing to trust him?
We withhold our trust, waiting for the loaf, completely blind to the fact that a crumb is infinitely more than we need.
What happens to your anxiety, your fear, and your need for control when you finally realize you've been demanding a loaf when a crumb is all you need to thrive? Think about it. We will see you next time.